ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਰਹਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਨੇਤਾਗਿਰੀ ਹੈ। ਹੁਣ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਬਦਲ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਹੈ। ਟਰੰਪ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਟਰੰਪ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਆ ਗਏ ਨੇ, ਬਾਈਡਨ ਰਿਟਾਇਰ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ। ਕਾਫੀ ਹੁਣ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਆ ਬਦਲਾਅ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਕਨੋਮੀ ਆ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੀ ਚਾਹੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ, ਕਾਫੀ ਉਹ ਤੇ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ। ਕਿਹੜੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਕੀ ਉਹ ਪਾਲਿਸੀਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਉਹ ਇਕਨੋਮੀ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ। ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਜੋ ਪਰਦੇਸਾਂ 'ਚ ਬੈਠੇ, ਉਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਘਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਆਪਣੀ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਚਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਲਈ ਆਪਾਂ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਖਰੀਦਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਉਹ ਕਈ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿਆਜ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਆ, ਲੋਨ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਿਲੇਗਾ, ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਚੱਲੇਗੀ। ਟਰੰਪ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੇਲ ਦੀ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸੋਲਵ ਕਰੂਗੇ ਵੀ ਡਰਿਲ ਬੇਬੀ ਡਰਿਲ। ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਤੇਲ ਬਣਾਵੇਗੀ, ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਤੇਲ ਦੀ ਸਪਲਾਈ ਵਧੇਗੀ, ਤੇਲ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਸ ਘਟੇਗਾ। ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕੀ ਬਣਦਾ, ਪਰ ਆਸ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਕਾਫੀ ਬਿਜ਼ਨੈਸਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਟਰਾਂਸਪੋਰਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਚਤ ਆਏਗੀ। ਲੇਕਿਨ ਇਹ ਇਕੱਲਾ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਚ ਹੋਵੇਗਾ। ਅੱਜ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਜੈਮਲ ਕੌਰ। ਜੈਮਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਏਜੰਟ ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਇਹ ਉੱਥੇ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਆਪਾਂ ਕੰਪੈਰੀਸਨ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਏਜੰਟਾਂ ਨਾਲ, ਤੇ ਉਸ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਕਿਆ ਹਾਲਾਤ ਆ, ਉਹ ਕਿਆ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ 25 ਚ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਦਾ ਕਿਆ ਬਣ ਸਕਦਾ। ਆਓ ਮਿਲੀਏ ਜੈਮਲ ਨਾਲ। ਜੈਮਲ ਜੀ, ਜਸਟ ਅ ਬਰੀਫ ਇੰਟਰੋਡਕਸ਼ਨ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਹੈਗੇ ਹੋ, ਬਟ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੋਰਟਫੋਲੀਓ ਹੈ ਕਾਫੀ ਜ਼ਬਰਦਸਤ ਹੈ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਧਰਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਔਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਿਲਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਫਾਦਰ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਧਰਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ ਕੰਟਰੀਬਿਊਟਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ। ਉਹ ਫੇਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਐਂਡ ਗਿਵ ਅਸ ਐਨ ਇਨਸਾਈਟ ਇਨਟੂ ਜੈਮਲ, ਦ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਏਜੰਟ ਫਰਮ ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ।
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Yes, I'm Jamel Kaur Singh. I'm born in England and been in Australia since I was 4 years old. I have a very eclectic upbringing, but over the last 25 years, I've been very much involved in the real estate and finance industry here in Australia. I've practiced in real estate and finance broking, but I've also lectured at RMIT and Holmes Glen in real estate and finance, as well as in cultural education, which we'll talk about another time. But my passion is inspiring people to diversify their portfolio and get into real estate as soon as they can. I guess here in Australia, when you look at Australia as a whole, properties have very much increased over time. And in Melbourne, which is where I'm based, the average property has doubled in value every 10 years. So the sooner people can get in, the better. And I think that's important, but I think it's also important for people to live within their means. We have a very much tall poppy syndrome, where somebody is doing something and you want to jump on board, and then you live outside your means. And after 30 years, 25 years in this industry, I can tell you that the majority of marriage breakdowns and family breakups, at the end of the day, the root cause is generally finances and money. And I think it's really important to make sure that people are on the same page. If I get that extra second job, then we can afford the bigger house, we can afford the better property, we can afford the better cars. But it's that second job where all of a sudden then that person is no longer participating in the house. They're no longer putting themselves in a position where they can go on a family holiday, where they can participate in the upbringing of the kids, when they can participate in, and that's where the nagging will start. And they're not, even if it's as stupid as not putting out the rubbish bin, it all comes down to finances and money. And I think that's something that we are getting very wrong in today's day and age.
I agree with you, Jamal. You bring up a lot of for families and consider when they're looking at buying real estate. you've brought up topics that are pretty relevant to a lot of other things we talked a couple of days back on the phone, whether it be faith, whether it be family. But you also mentioned that in Melbourne and the Australia economic environment, real estate has gone up by double every 10 years. And you're in finance. Um, Interest rates impact a lot of people's ability to go shop. There's down payments required. In the US, where I'm based, we have a situation of if somebody can put in 20% of the purchase price, then they can get a reasonably good rate. Their monthly payments will be fairly good. If they don't come in with that 20%, then you fall into the category of some sort of assistance where the government will provide some assurances to the bank. And those loans come with a PMI, uh, basically mortgage insurance, where the government guarantees the bank, if you give this loan, we promise to refund you, make you whole to about 70-80% of the loan amount in the case that there's some difficulties that pop up. Is there any sort of similar programs in Australia? Since we're looking at family and you brought, having that discussion, being on the same page, to get on that same, a couple needs to know they have enough for a down payment. I mean, in America, the program for zero down. The market really crashed back in the early 2000s when there was a lot of the negative amortization loans, teaser interest rates. So, not to dwell too much on that, various programs exist here. That's 10% down, 3%. Many of them are government assisted programs where the government will even give you a loan or something towards buying that house. But there are criteria, income based criteria, family size criteria. So, not to bore you, but ask you the question, if I move to Australia, I've got a job, and my family's coming to join me 6 months down the road, and I'm trying to work with Jamel to buy a house. What is Jamel going to not send down? I can get you the house. I don't have 20%. How can you help me?
Yep. Okay, so there are very similar in Australia. Anything over 80% lend is lender's mortgage insurance. You have the option of paying lender's mortgage insurance, which is a little premium on top of the loan at the start of the loan, and then after that, it's fine. You can still get first tier lender loans on those loans. There's no issues with any of that. But there are also a lot of government incentives, especially for first home buyers. They're bringing in a lot of single parenting initiatives. Young people initiatives, older people initiatives. There's also reverse mortgages for the older people. There's a lot of different options as to getting a loan. Yes, you have to be a PR of Australia. You have to, for some of them, you even have to be a citizen of Australia. You have to have the income and capacity to pay the loan, which is fair enough. And the thing is, if the bank is saying to you, you can afford a property that's $1 million, that doesn't mean you should go out and spend $1 million on a property. You can buy something for a lot less. They don't know that there's a child on the way or potentially a child on the way. And there's so many costs involved with children, and people don't take those sorts of things into consideration when the banks say to them, oh, yeah, we can get you a loan for X amount of dollars. And I think a very holistic approach needs to happen. And so for me, at my age, where I'm at, it's about looking at all the different incentives that are available to you. Use the government. So first home buyers, if the property's under 600,000, you don't pay any stamp duty. Otherwise, the stamp duty is around the 4% mark of your property purchase price. So that can save you a substantial amount of money. So just because the banks are saying to you, you can borrow 800,000, you might be better off buying something under 600,000 as your first home. And then later on, you can turn that into your investment property and then buy the bigger house later. And then use that 25 odd thousand dollars that the government's saving you to do that. And people don't actually look at those overall things. So I think making sure that you're associating yourself with people that know what they're talking about. There's no point asking Uncle Dharam down the road who doesn't own properties as such advice on buying properties. The same way as um, Uncle Jaginda down the road has absolutely no knowledge of cars, but you go to him to advise for cars. Uh, I think that's the conundrum that a lot of people have, and that it comes down to sangat. At the end of the day, it's about the sangat that you keep, making sure that you are associating yourself with the people that you aspire to be like is a big part of my world. And so, yeah, tapping into those incentives is really important, especially as new immigrants. If you're coming to Australia, make sure you are getting to use those incentives. So people say that you can't buy a property in Australia. My 22-year-old owns 3 properties, and that's not handouts from mum. That's him using the system because he's been listening to me talking for the last 15 years about real estate and finance, and it sparked an interest in him to make sure he keeps up to date with the latest grants. So during COVID, he was doing his year 12, and he knew that he needed to make sure he had 6 months of serviceability. So he, while doing year 12, because he was working from home full time, because Melbourne was the longest lockdowns in the world. So he worked at the mechanics. So then he got to get out of the house. He went and did pizza delivery. So he made sure he had enough income coming in. And as soon as he hit that 6-month mark, the government actually gave this initiative where first home buyers, they don't have to pay any stamp duty anyway, but the government was incentivizing an extra $25,000 for you to go and build a new house. So with a 20, and you didn't have to pay lender's mortgage insurance, so you only needed a 5% deposit. So his 5% deposit on his $420,000 property house and land package that he bought in Clyde North, he put down 23,000. I think altogether with the cost, it was about $24,000 deposit, which he'd been saving for years about. He had his serviceability to meet the bank criteria. And then the government incentivized him because it was a new house, gave him $10,000, which is the normal. And then he didn't have to pay any stamp duty. And then on top of it, gave him another $25,000. So to buy this property, he ended up with an extra $10,000, $12,000 in his pocket. And then at the end of the 2 years, when it finally did get built, he ended up with $250,000 equity in a property. And then with that equity, bought another 2 properties. And he did that when he was 18, and then now he's 22. But I'm not saying jump in and buy XYZ. It's about looking at your overall picture and living within your means. So my daughter, she's in the same position. She's bought a property as well. And they're 22 and 23. And they've done it on their own bat, but they've done it with the knowledge. And it's about making sure you tap into that knowledge and looking at we have a tendency in our community of, I think, I'm 4 generations away from India. So if I'm stereotyping, please do excuse me, but there's this tendency of everyone puts in together to get that 20% deposit and then buy a property, and then everybody then helps the next person buy a property. And which is fantastic because we're self-sustaining and we're always encouraging to each other to keep in. And then we end up creating these little ghetto mentality style communities wherever we are. But why do that when you can actually use the government incentives to do it? And it's not going to cost you any extra. In fact, it's going to put money in your pocket. So tapping into your local knowledge, political arena is really important. And that's why it's important also for people when you make a country and you call it home, make it your country and call it home. Make sure you are on the electoral roll to vote. Make sure that you are getting the information that you can source to make your life better. For example, tapping into parenting payments when you have a child. Most people will just take the initial 6 weeks that you get, but you can actually apply and get 6 months of parenting payments. Don't miss out on those opportunities because you're not educated in that area. And I think that is the key. Wherever you are, whether you're in Canada, UK, Australia, America, make sure you're tapping into all that you can, because at the end of the day, when you are out there working, you are paying taxes. So when you need that help and that benefit, don't be ashamed to ask for it, because you've been paying the taxes to pay for that anyway. That's where your taxpayer dollars are going. Rather than sitting back and, I'm trying to find a nice word for bitching, but when you're sitting back and you're complaining about other communities, oh, look at those community, they're always sucking on all of our taxpayer dollars and they're doing this and they're doing that. I'm not saying suck on the system, but I'm saying when you are in need, use the system. And the only way to do that is through education. And I guess it's programs like this that you have that give people the knowledge that they need to be able to use the system to their advantage, to better themselves and the whole community.
Right. With all these assistance programs, you have a couple. They come to you, Jamal, ਅਸੀਂ ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦਣਾ ਕੀ ਕਰੀਏ, ਸਾਡੀ ਨੌਕਰੀ ਏਦਾਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, and ਕੋਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ 20% ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਾਸ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਟਰਸਟ ਰੇਟ ਕੈਸਾ ਮਿਲ?
So whether you're getting in general terms, whether you're getting a 20% deposit down or you're getting a 95% lend, so only a 5% deposit down, the interest rate isn't much in the way of difference. Right now, it's sitting anywhere between 5.8% and 6.4%, right? And yes, 5 years ago, we had 2%, but that was unheard of in the whole of history. Like when my parents came to Australia 44 years ago and they bought their house, they were paying 17% interest. And here we are jumping up and down like yo-yos on 6%. It's not that bad. You go and get a credit card and your credit card's sitting at 19, 20, 22%. So 6% is still not bad. You can still buy properties, but live within your means. So whether you have a 20% deposit or a 5% deposit, find out. You might need to do a 6-month savings program to show the banks that you have the ability to pay the loans. Now, with all the algorithms of banking, and I guess that's where my advantage is. I'm not just real estate. I've been in finance. I'm on the board for the Finance Brokers Association of Australia. So to have the finance knowledge, I'm not coming at a couple with just the knowledge of real estate. I'm giving them the overall holistic approach to it. So we might have to put them into like a 6-month savings plan because the bank is going to collect 6 months of data. Yeah. So every time they tap their card, it's creating data and algorithms about the way you live. For example, my cousin brother, he works as the warehouse manager at a factory place, right? At an engineering place. And because he's the supervisor, on Fridays, he goes and buys, it's called Potato Cake Friday, right? And so he goes and buys all the stuff, potato cakes, and they generally buy a case of beer, right? And so he goes and puts all of that onto his credit card and then goes back to work with the receipts, and then the accountant gives him the money from petty cash. But he does this and he's been doing this for years. Potato Cake Friday, he puts it on his credit card. But that's about $200 that he spends on his credit card every Friday for work. The banks had decided that he's an alcoholic and he eats junk, so he's not he's not a good candidate to give a loan to, because that's what the algorithms had decided from his credit card statement. So we then had to go back to the banks and prove and show them the petty cash receipts and get a letter from his employer about it. Every single time you tap your card, it is creating data and algorithms about you. So be very conscious about the amount of coffees, because you might be the one that goes and buys the coffees for the office and then everybody gives you the money back or puts it, pay IDs it back into your account or whatever the case is. So if you are in the process of thinking about buying a home, you need to make sure you're very conscious about every tap that you take. When you go out for dinner with all the friends, don't put it on your credit card because you want to get the frequent flyer points and then everybody pays you back. So it's that education that's really important. And our community, unfortunately, a lot of them don't understand that. So then they get rejected from the first tier lenders. Here in Australia, you call them the big four. And then because they get rejected and they haven't understood why they were rejected, they go to the second tier lenders, which means they're paying higher interest rates. So it all boils down to education.
Right. You talked about stamp duty. Over in the US, when we purchase property, we go to the title company, they do a title search, and they basically demonstrate that there's no issues with the property, there's no liens, and there's no pending transactions that might hurt. And once they've done that, they record the property at the county recorder's office. And from that day forward, your loan, your ownership are recorded. If it's a couple or maybe a different partnership, once that's
Trust.
recorded, right. So, when you're talking about stamp duty, I'm assuming that that's part of the registration process. What else
So
is
right. So we have, for settlement, you have stamp duty, which is state revenue office mandate that on a property it's tax. It comes down to it that it's tax on the land and the building that you are buying. So on a $600,000 property, you're looking at around 25 to 30,000, depending on which state you are, because it's a state-based tax. So for a first home buyer, various states again slightly different, but around the 600,000 mark if you're buying up to there. And then there's a sliding scale to 750 for first home buyers, but you pay stamp duty on the property. But what you're talking about is your land tax and your title costs, which is normally done through a solicitor or a conveyancer. They do it all, and it's generally now all done electronically. So they get together online, they do whatever they need to do, press whatever buttons they need to press, and there's charges in there. But then they're like the titles transfer and stuff, you're talking $157 and stuff. It's not huge amounts. The stamp duty is the big amount. Your conveyancing fees for a basic settlement of a property is around $1,500. That's your costs and stuff. Then you have disbursements. And so, for example, if I sell my property today, but I paid my rates in October, so you pay for the whole year, yeah? So then that gets adjusted. So I'm only paying from October till January, and then you have to pay me back for the rest and stuff. So there's those sorts of costs. But generally you're looking at around $1,500 for a settlement cost, which includes all your land tax and transfers and things like that, and your conveyances costs. And then you've got your stamp duty, and then your lender's mortgage insurance. Your lender's mortgage insurance is taken by the bank, and that is if the loan is over 80%, there's lender's mortgage insurance. But if you've managed to tap into one of the schemes, that can be waived as well. The government also, so some states, some of the incentives are state-based, some of them are federal-based. Some of the incentives include where the government you pay 5%, you show that you have 5% genuine savings, and then the government will pay the extra 15%. So then you're not in that lender's mortgage insurance territory, but then the government will own 15% of your property. So as your property increases in value, so does that amount. So if you're refinancing or you're selling your property, then so it's really important to make sure you're tapping into, hopefully you can retain full ownership of your property. Um, Again, brokers and agents that aren't in the know, that just go with the flow, are not necessarily going to know all of these little things until they've had the experience. So make sure, whenever, my advice to you is, when you're finding a buyer's agent or real estate agent or a broker or a solicitor, make sure you're using one that has that wealth of experience. We have a lot of, especially Indian mortgage brokers and real estate agents, that are, because it's a quick, easy course and it's something you can make money on fast. And they've been in the industry, 6 months, 6 years, but they don't know all the quirks, because it's just go with the flow and do and learn on the job, as opposed to do the education behind the actual knowledge, and looking into policies. And also, oh, hang on, if you wait an extra 2 months, the government's already put this policy into Parliament, and hopefully this will be approved, and then you would save an extra $40,000. So for me, and what I do is making sure that you're getting the best value for what you are, and you're living within your means.
At living within the means, and I was agreeing with you on that. Uh, the processing overall and the stamp duty and the government assistance programs, what you mentioned is the government owns a part of your property because they
Yeah.
gave you 5 of your purchase price, and then they're going to own 5% of that property. So if you sell that property 5 years down the road, it's doubled in value. Well, basically, what we were talking about is the value increases and the government's share ownership of it. So even though the government is giving you assistance at
Yeah.
5% or whatever, they are actually physically owning that 5%. And when they take that 5%, they get paid when you sell the property or you do something else to
If your
transfer it.
property has, yeah, so if your property has doubled in value, their 5% becomes 10%. So basic
It
maths.
does it come 5% selling price when you if you sell it. So it's still 5%. But
It's
the
5%.
dollar now, if I was to go with this program that you just mentioned, the government helps me out. I buy this house with 5% from the government. They own 5% of my house, living there. I'm not going to pay the government anything during this time, except they own 5% of my house. Now, could I buy that 5% back from them? Could I make payments to them and
No, so
reduce that?
yeah, as soon as you're in a position to do so, you can just refinance your loan, pay them off their 5%, and then off you go.
Got it.
Yeah, so you
So
can do
that,
that at any. But keeping in mind that it's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. I'd
yeah,
prefer the government to own 5% of the property, which is the difference between me buying the property and not buying the property. I might as well let the government own 5%. I mean, what's the big deal? If you don't have to, and there's some other scheme that can mitigate that, great. But if there's not, using that government scheme is a great scheme to at least get your foot in the market. You do whatever you can to get your foot in the market.
totally agree. It's a stepping stone, and
It's a
with the
stepping
appreciation
stone.
prices, can figure a way out. And
Excellent.
to my knowledge, we don't have something like that, but there are other programs. I've just heard recently that there's a corporation, a private enterprise, where they come in and they give you an equity loan or something, but they take a piece of the value in
Well,
exchange for that.
I actually did an interview about, it must have been about 10 years ago, where I said I'd love to have the wealth in the world and give people that 20% deposit and buy the house, and I own 20% of that property. And when they refinance, also, I'd actually come up with the scheme about 10 years ago. Um, and said the government's not clever enough to do this, because it's a great way for the government to actually, and then I think that got through to a few people, and the government ended up doing it, which was great. But as somebody who, if I'm My problem is I'm constantly giving. I'm not a wealth creation kind of. I think with the upbringing that I've had, um, that seva element in my life has always been a very big part of who I am. So yeah, I drive a nice car, I own properties and stuff, but I'm not minting in money in any way, shape, or form. But if I had an extra $1 million lying around, I would actually set up a not-for-profit style social enterprise where we just do it's like traditional money lending, really, but you're not you're just giving the 20% deposit and then you're putting a caveat on the property so they can't refinance or sell without you. And it's a set and forget. But then that money then comes back in that 5 years, 10 years time where you then can refinance. And then when that happens, then that money then goes to the next person. So it's about, so whether if I own 20% of the property and the property is doubled in value, then I'm going to be getting back 40% of that dollar of value amount, but 20%. And then that can then continue and we can have this community is working for community, not so much to make money myself, but more so in the betterment of the community to be able to help the next person and the next person, and also then use those extra funds towards education and incentivizing people to become Australian citizens and create that sense of pride in being Australian, which really isn't there. And I think America has, there's a lot of pride in America and everybody flies the flags and does all of that sort of stuff. We don't have that in Australia. And I guess it's a very much younger country and the diaspora of Sikhs, especially that have come here. But the impact that the Sikhs have made in Australia in the time that we have been here has been huge. And the way for us to expand as a community is to really that economic input into the country further and also get into politics. But unfortunately, there is this tall poppy syndrome in our community where if somebody is climbing the ladder financially or within politics and stuff, everybody else will jump down their throat and say, oh, badnami ho gaya, and they've done this and they've done that, and that person's just in it for the wrong reasons. And even if they want to climb that ladder and create change in Australia for the right reasons, like we have organizations in Australia like Sikh Youth Australia, and they have their young professionals network, and it's about supporting one another to create a betterment not just of Sikhs but for Australia. And I think the more that we can do in this space of education is really important, whether it's in real estate and finance, whether it's in the political field, but to encourage each other for the right reasons. But then you have the candidates that are standing for local council and they don't speak a word of English. How are they going to read through policy documents when they get into council, when they themselves don't have a command of the language? How are they going to influence policy in there if they can't read the policy documents and understand them to their fullest? So yeah, there is a lot to be done, and we've got a long way to go. But it's things like AAJ KAL that can actually help in that education of our communities around the world.
Hopefully, we're able to do that. Just looking back, and what would be your summary of real estate in Australia over 2024? Did it go up? Did the interest rates impact anything? Were people buying? Were people selling? Waiting for 20? In the US, we've just gone through, so we're expecting new policies that Trump that might bring down inflation. They might bring down interest rates. It will create a sort of a ripple effect in people being able to buy or being able to afford homes. But then the other side to that is when there's a supply and demand issue, if the buyers come in, then the prices go up. If the supply of the housing market is limited to whatever you have, it's approved, permitted, and everything else. And then people who own homes already, they sell for whatever reason they have. So My view is that the housing market has a limited supply of homes available for sale. They may be homes, existing homes, living in that, classify them as resale homes or uh, market that's already there, existing. And then there's new home construction. In Australia, what would you say the last 12 months that we've gone through, was the market stagnant? Was it going down? Was it going up? And then we'll talk about 25 after.
So in 2020, before we hit COVID and during COVID, you could lock in an interest rate at 2%. So on a $600,000 property, the repayments would have been about $2,200 on a $600,000 loan. They were fixed in for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, sometimes 5 years. They finished in 20, a lot of them finished in 2023, 2024, and your repayments went from 2,200 up to about 3,600, so about a $1,500 increase per month on the average home loan, which meant there was a lot of people that couldn't keep up with that extra cost of living, and the properties were being sold. The other thing that happened is the Labor government, uh, their push towards the lower demographic vote is absolutely ridiculous. So they were incentivizing and changed the rules at VCAT, the Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal, and tenants were getting so much right where landlords were being abused. I have examples that I could give you, personal examples that I can give you of how hard it was to get rid of a tenant that wasn't paying or that was, putting holes in walls and things like that. And the government has given tenants so much right. So you've got a lot of landlords that are now selling their investment property because it's just not worth them hanging on to it with the amount of costs increase and the troubles that tenants are giving. So which means there's a fair few properties that were being sold, some fire sale because of the increase of the loan and banks going to take it over, all that sort of thing. So it was a great opportunity to buy. But what's happened is we've gone like that, and now we've hit this plateau. We're going into a federal election this year, so things are very tenterhooks. There were Trump parties on the Yarra River, picnics and stuff happening yesterday with these insane business, like really rich business people were having parties on the Yarra River yesterday because of Trump, which was interesting. Why we are celebrating what's going on there, where we don't do anything like that here in Australia for our own. So I think that's going to have an impact as well. But 2024, whether you were selling, whether you were buying, there's no time. Like people say, oh, I'm going to wait for this to happen. Interest rates are going to go down, and then there's going to be more buyers on the market, so therefore I'll sell at that point. Each individual has their own time frame and needs. What is
Yep.
your need? And I think people kind of get swooped up with the media and all that they hear, that they kind of either miss the boat or they put themselves in a financial position where now we have to sell because of whatever the reasons are. And I think
Right.
people need to, again, if you are educated in this field, seek advice, but also look at your situation. There's no time like right now to buy or sell if you are in a position to do so. Don't wait for some big miraculous something or other to take place, because then you might miss the boat. But then in hindsight, hindsight is experience and education, right? So
Yep.
Interest rates will start dropping. I don't think they're going to drop very much at all because at the end of the day, the Labor government, and now coming into the election, it's like they've sat on their hands for the last 3 years and now it's coming up to elections and all these policies are coming out and they're spending money left, right, and center. So, from a financial perspective, an economic perspective, we can't be reducing our interest rates too much anytime soon. We might get a little bit of relief, and the government will probably push for that sooner rather than later because at the end of the day, they want to turn around and go, oh, yeah, we've reduced the interest rates. Yeah, nonsense. Um, but that's again politics and government. It's about you and your needs. There is no time to buy like right now. Now, if you are buying, if you're a first home buyer, tap into all the grants and buy residential property for you to live in. I wouldn't in Victoria be buying investment properties really from a residential perspective just because of the nonsense going on with VCAT and the tenancies rights. We've had squatters that we've had to deal with over the Christmas period that you would not believe the headache. I had cops in one of our properties that we're selling every single day getting rid of squatters. It's the crime and things like that in certain areas are just becoming ridiculous joke, but that's because punishment isn't fitting of the crime. And there's such a lapse and lax in that area that that is another issue to take into consideration. So right now,
Yep.
if I was investing, if I was buying right now, unless it was from my own residential home, I would be purchasing in commercial real estate, not in residential real estate. So it's a good opportunity to start diversifying your portfolio. Again, it's up to the individual circumstances. Some people might not be in a financial serviceability as far as the banks are concerned to buy that kind of property. They can only afford or buy XYZ. Whatever your circumstances are, look at somebody who has the experience. Oh, yep, come to me, come to me, come to me. But it's more about finding a person that has what you have, but is not narrow minded to one way because they don't know any other.
Right.
So, right
Right.
now, diversify your portfolio. If I was if I had somebody that had lots of money coming in from America, I would buy them a huge portfolio of things, or I would buy them a big commercial site, or I would buy them a residential site that you can get in income in for now, but it's either a demolition job or something that can renovate the whole thing and then change the bracket of where it is. You need to buy properties that are growth potential. Yeah. So
Right.
ag- every single person's circumstances, according to their age, according to their vision, according to their goals, is going to be different. It's not a one size fits all.
Definitely. Um, Now, you mentioned that we in America, we've just had the election, we've had the transfer of power, and we expect certain policy changes. Some of them have come in already. We'll experience the impact of those policy changes in the near future. As far as your mention of possible Australia nationwide elections, federal elections, and you mentioned that the current government there is bringing in changes to sort of claim that we did this or we did that, and make certain market changes or market influencing changes in policy. And one of those was you mentioned that there's very possible that interest rates would go down. And reflecting on that, back to the 1970s, my parents bought a house in England and their interest rate was 17%. The first house I
Yeah.
bought in California was 12%. So the
Yeah.
current interest rates are very beneficial. They're what 20 years ago people were saying that the market rate should be about 6 or 7%
Yeah.
on average. Now, looking ahead with these changes that you've mentioned in Australia, possibly due to some upcoming election, and again, you've got some couple sitting there, young sort of couple, and they've got their finances in order, and you've talked to them, you've counseled them at the right time and everything else, and you've gone through all that, they're ready to buy. With these possible, nobody has a crystal ball, but with the crystal ball looking as the way you probably see 2025, what would you tell those people to buy now, wait a couple of months, or
Now,
25, the year is going to be
if you are
skyrocketing?
in a position to buy now. There is no time like right now, because again, crystal ball, crystal ball. But if you are in a financial position, you've got all your ducks in order, buy now. I can find you properties that a lot of people, like I get a lot of properties off market and stuff. Having been in the industry for so long and also having taught in the industry, I get real estate agents giving me deals daily from $300,000 properties up to $2 million properties. There are properties coming on the market all the time, but it's not about buy now as in you buy the first thing that you see. It's about making sure you've done your homework and look outside the box. We want to live here because of these reasons. Okay, but what about if those are the reasons that you want to live there? That means that this might even be more suitable. Or you could buy a bigger house if you move to that area, or you could buy something a little bit smaller, but you're going to be 20 minutes closer to work. That again, there's so many different options and variables. Buy now. There will be a flood of if if the government does continue on the trajectory of releasing policies and grants that they're doing at the moment, with the elections looming in May this year, there are going to be more and more incentives creeping in over the next few months, which means there's going to be more buyers ready to buy. So therefore, if you're in a position to buy now, be ready to buy now, and let's find you the right property, right? But if you are oohing and umming because you haven't quite got all your ducks in a row, hold off a few months and we'll buy then. There is no such thing as miss the boat. There is no such thing as shoulda, woulda, coulda. It is experience, move on. And I think that is the biggest key that we need to take. We have a Jodi Kalar approach, and that's part of our DNA and our psyche. Why do something tomorrow when I can do it today? Yeah.
A very common English phrase.
Yeah. And I've lived my life by that. I mean, I've just finished my doctorate. I did an MBA 2 years ago. I have several other qualifications and degrees and stuff. Constantly doing, constantly evolving, and making sure that I'm up to date with the latest of the knowledge. I've got a
Right,
son who's Asperger's, ADHD, OCD. He has trachea issues. He's got rhabdomyolysis. He's not the wellest of boys, but he's the most amazing mind. And all he does is constantly read and understand what's going on in the market. He's very into the politics and finance and real estate, which is great. So if I say to him, "Hey, I've got this couple, this is their criteria," he will find me the biggest and best deal for them and their circumstances right now. And if they come to me tomorrow, I'll find it tomorrow. If they come to me in a
right,
month's time, I'll find it then. There's always market deals that you can find. And having been in the industry so long, I will get a real estate agent saying to me, "Jamel, this property's been on the market for 120 days. This vendor's now desperate to sell. If you get me an offer, blah, 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 they're going to sell it." And that could be $50,000, $100,000 less than market value. Or,
right.
"Jamil, I've have a buyer, a seller that needs to sell, but they don't have any money for marketing expenses. Do you have any buyers off market that we can propose this property to because they're desperate to sell, or they need to sell because of XYZ, or if you can find somebody
Right.
that can do a short settlement." So those deals are all the time. There is no time like right now. Get your finances and your ducks in a row and just get to the market. But make sure you're using somebody. And that's the other thing. I personally don't like dealing with a lot of our own community because they expect me to do everything for free. I am a buyer's agent. I have 25 years of experience in this. I charge a fee. Don't suck everything out of my brain and then get it for free and then try and turn around and go, oh, I see a buyer. I still got to pay my bills.
Right.
Yeah. So if you are getting the information for free, the chances are it's not all the information.
True.
So pay somebody that is in the know whatever they need to charge, because that's the only way that you're going to get where you need to go. And if you're
Got it.
thinking, oh, if I pay for that $10,000, what is the value that I'm going to bring? You know what? I save people 50, 100, $200,000. I save people on buying an asset in this area, which is only 10 kilometers from that area that you wanted to buy. But I also know that the reason I'm putting you there is because there is a train line going to go through that in the next 5 years, and your property is going to increase in value substantially. Yeah, you
Right.
might thank me in 10 years' time, but at the time, you don't want to pay me the $10,000 to give you that information. And that's because Suffle and myself will sit there with the government overlays and budget, federal and state. So when we look at your what you're looking for, we're not just doing it from a real estate perspective. We're also looking at it, where is the government spending money? What's in their budgets? Hey, they're going to spend $1 billion on Westfield Shopping Centre or a new hospital in such and such an area. That's where they need to be buying. Disney's coming to Melbourne. They're either going to be buying in Cooey Rup or they're going to be buying in Avalon. The property prices in those areas are going to soar. So it's that kind of knowledge that you are paying for. And if you're not prepared to pay the fees, good luck. Have fun. And hopefully you strike it right.
Um, so you bring up another point when you brought up fees. In the US, the National Association of Realtors had just settled a lawsuit regarding buyer's agent fees and the standard real estate fees. I'm definitely aware from our discussion and expectations that the systems are different for you in Australia, for us in America. Buyer's agent, seller's agent. If you're selling somebody's property, what is the cost? I want to sell my house. I come to Jamal and I say, Jamal, can you sell my house? I can sell your house, but
Yep.
I'm going to charge you this much. I have a buyer, and therefore I can sell your house to this buyer, and this is what it's going to cost you. On the other side, I'm a buyer. Now, my understanding is from what we just talked about, a buyer's agent, a seller's agent have individual fees. The buyer in Australia is paying his agent the fee. The seller is paying their agent the fee. It used to
Yeah.
be in the US that the fee came out of the seller's price. There was an agreed amount for a fee, 2%, 3%, 6%, whatever it was. And then the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, they negotiated a split on that.
So
In the end, buyer knew what the agent got, the seller knew what the agent got. But mostly the process was, I want to sell my house for 200,000. Jamal tells me, okay, 6%, that's 12,000 for me and 188 for you. And I'm going to market it, I'm going to sell it. Then comes along Peter Smith from another brokerage. He's got a buyer, and then Jamal is the one who says, "Hey, I got this house. You got the buyer. We can split this 6%, 3% each." That's how it used to be here. Over the wave of change of political lawsuits and just basic control of market, or however you want to call
and
it,
also common
the
sense. At the end of the day, the vendor, the the seller selling agent is working for the vendor. The buyer's
yes,
agent is working for the seller. If I'm being paid by the vendor, how am I going to be getting the best price from my seller? And if the buyer's agent is being paid by the vendor's agent, at the end of the day, they just want to do a deal. It doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean it's going to be the best deal for the seller or the buyer.
Right.
Now, buyer's agency is new in Australia. I mean, I've been doing it 20 years, but it is a new concept in Australia. So buyers are still very hesitant to use a buyer's agent, right?
Yes.
But there are advantages to using a buyer. I know the real estate jargon that's going to come out of that realtor's mouth. So therefore I can counteract that. And because they know my reputation, who I am and how hard I negotiate, I'm not going to get all the fluff. I'm just going to get straight to the point. Where are we at? How are we at? Let's go. Let's make a deal. And I will, in some circumstances, help that vendor with the language that they need to use. I will help the buyer's agent with the seller's agent with the language they need to use for the vendor to get the deal done. Like, because at the end of the day, I'm working for the buyer.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, it should always be a win-win situation. We're not out to
Mhm.
screw anybody else. And I think that is just part of humanity. You know, we're
True.
not there to just if that's what the market value is, yeah, okay, save $5,000-$10,000, but don't don't be unethical about it. And
Right.
unfortunately, in the real estate industry, there is a lot of unethics. So for me, it's yep, win-win situation, but I'm being paid by the person buying the property because I'm getting the best price for them. And the
Right.
seller is getting paid there because they're working for them. We're not in cahoots with each other. We're working together to get him the best price, you the best price, but we can't be paid by each other because at the end of the day, then that is unethical. So here in Australia, a seller's agent will charge anywhere between 1.5% to 2.5% plus marketing fees. Marketing can be anywhere
Okay.
between $2,000 $20,000 for marketing, but they'll give you a schedule as to what that is, and it's fairly regulated. Um, then from a seller's buyer's agency, as I said, is only new and it's not legislated as much as it should be, but you have to be a fully licensed real estate agent to be a seller's agent as well. So a buyer's agent will charge anywhere between 1 and 2.5%. But they might also just do it as a fixed fee, because whether I'm selling you a $300,000 property or a $3 million property, I'm doing the same amount of work. So different buyers agents doing different things, and that part of it isn't very regulated at this stage. And for me, it's all about circumstances. I'm working again within the means of the person that I'm dealing with, and I might actually
Right.
end up doing their finance as well as then buying them property. And I get paid by the banks to do the finance, and so I might then reduce the fees on the buyer's fees. So it just depends on the circumstances. I'm not in a position anymore where I'm doing 10, 20, 30 clients a month. I've just before COVID given up all the offices. I had 8 brokers working for me and all that sort of stuff. I had the big company. I was making the same amount of money as what I do now on my own, just with my son and I working. And I've got a PA as well. But that's it. Because then I was always just putting out fires of employees and all that sort of stuff. So I've scaled everything back, and I like to give people me and my experience. I like to get them in my car and drive them around to show them the properties. And then people, when they look at a property, yeah, they see that the bathroom is old, and they don't want to go and buy that house even though they're going to save $100,000. And I'd be standing there saying, okay, do you know what? I will have this bathroom fixed for you because I know all the builders, and I can get this all done and look pretty like this for $10,000. Why would you not buy this house and save $100,000 because the bathroom's not what you want it, or the kitchen It's just cosmetic. All the kitchen, the
Right.
painting, the colors, they're all cosmetic. And I, after having done this for so many years, can give you approximately how much it's going to cost to get it fixed, right? But if you can save $100,000 and then you fix up what you want to fix up for $10,000, $20,000, one, you're going to have it the colors and style that you like. And
Yep.
two, you've all of a sudden then increased your equity and you've got $80,000 of equity in this property now.
Right.
So, and that only comes with actually getting in the car with them and seeing them and listening and listening. I think a big part of being a buyer's agent is listening to their needs, especially when you're dealing with older people. Um, they've been in the big family home for 20, 30, 40 years, and now we're looking at getting them to downsize. And she'll be saying, "Oh, but just because I'm getting older doesn't mean all my stuff is getting less." They they have this sentimental attachment to a lot of stuff. And
Yep.
listening to those needs and working through those needs is really hard. Um,
Right.
Making sure that they have the support. A lot of older people will then start looking at a property that's 2 stories. You don't want a 2-story house. You're walking fine now, but it's not going to be long before the hip replacement and the wheelchair or the walker's going to, this isn't going to be practical. Oh, but we need the
Yes.
extra bedroom. It's like,
Hmm.
come on, as long as you've got a bedroom and your bathroom and your kitchen and everything's downstairs, so then the upstairs can be left for when the grandkids come over, fine.
Yep.
But it's about that experience in what I've been doing. I just because they want a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house doesn't mean that every property is going to fit that criteria. They need to make sure
Definitely.
they think, okay, what's going to happen in 5 years' time when your knees start going.
Yep.
And all of that only comes with experience.
Definitely. Just to follow on from all of this, we talked about interest rates. We've talked about right time to buy. When you mentioned the opportunity to refinance and pay off the government share and all that stuff, you mentioned time frames of a 2 year, 5 year. In America, we have mortgage rates that are fixed for the life of the loan.
I
We
know.
can go get So we can get a mortgage, and many people, my son included, a few years back, bought a house. Interest rates. He got the military benefit because he was in the U.S. Marines, but the house I'm in, I have a 30-year loan on it. My interest rate is fixed. I chose not to refinance in the when it was in the threes and twos, because I was going to save a little bit of money. But that was because I just didn't want to pay the extra costs and everything else. I calculated it was really not going to benefit me in extending my loan, lowering the rates, and all the other stuff. Regardless, my question to you is, does Australia have a similar system where it's a 30-year mortgage, or are you
We have
refinancing every 5 years, getting a new loan every 3 or 4 years?
we have a 30-year loan. Again, age dependent. If you're now starting to hit 55, 60 and buying a property, then they're going to reduce that period to 20 years, 15 years, 25 years, depending on your age. But generally, you're looking at a 30-year loan. You can do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year fixed, or you do variable, or you do split loan where half of it's variable, half of it's split, depending on, again, your circumstances, your income, whether you're going to be able to offset any against tax because you've got an ABN. So you're running a bit of a business from home. There's lots of reasonings. Also, whether you want that security of, one, the interest rate, and two, um, the knowledge that you know how much you're going to have to pay for the next 2 years, 3 years. Especially if you're thinking about having kids and stuff like that. But the maximum that you can fix a loan in Australia is 5 years. So everyone who refinanced in the 2-3% mark is laughing if they fixed it for the 5-year period, which I had told a fair few of my clients to do, again, on their circumstances. But now at 6, if you're fixing it for 2 to 3 years, you're getting around the 6% to 6.2% kind of mark. Um, but I wouldn't really fix it for more than that because the chances are the rates are going to come down. And so when those rates come down, there's no point being in a fix because then it's cost you more to exit. But again, the
Definitely.
maximum loan here is 5 years. So after 5 years, it goes on to the variable, or you refinance within the same company, and then there's no costs involved in any of that. Or at that point, when your fixed period finishes, you then look for a better loan and you would jump ship, depending. Unfortunately, a lot of mortgage brokers, they're going to turn around to you after every 2 years and say, hey, let's refinance with another lender. I can save you $20 a month. But they don't tell you that it's going to cost you X amount of dollars to do that because they're going to get paid again. So why wouldn't they?
Right.
So again, be conscious of those sorts of education. I'd love to just do an education podcast where I get people calling me with these kind of questions because I've been in the industry so long. I don't care about I'm not chasing that dollar. All I want to do is make sure people are educated in financial literacy and in real estate so they're making the right choices and not having the wool pulled over their eyes, you know? So of course a finance broker is going to say to you, refinance after 2 years. They're going to pick up their next $2,000-$3,000. Why wouldn't they?
Well, I think that's a very good point where we conclude. We've had a long, nice discussion.
Education,
So
education, education.
Yep, that's all it's about. But we're also limited by time. So what we'll do is we'll conclude this session. We'll schedule another one. But we have, based on your portfolio, there's a lot of things we have to talk about aside from real estate. But that will be offline. So thank you for joining us and thank you for educating us about how it works in Australia. Definitely there's differences, but there's a lot of common stuff, buyer's agent, seller's agent, and how the system works may be different. But appreciate your time and look forward to discussing again. And we'll call it an end of this session, but not end of our discussion. So we'll carry on talking. जी हैं ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਸੀ ਜੈਮਲ ਕੌਰ ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਮੈਲਬਰਨ ਇਹ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਏਜੰਟ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ ਦੇ ਰੀਅਲ ਏਸਟੇਟ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ ਤੇ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਹੈਗੇ ਲੋਨ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਆ ਔਰ ਖਰੀਦਣ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੇਚਣ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਜੈਮਲ ਹੋਣੀ ਥੋੜੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਸਲਾਹ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਘਰ ਖਰੀਦਣਾ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਰਟੀ ਖਰੀਦਣਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਨਾਲੋਂ ਵਧੀਆ ਸਮਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਏਗਾ ਖਰੀਦਣਾ ਅੱਜ ਖਰੀਦ ਲਓ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਰਟੀ ਉਹ ਵੱਧਦੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਲੋਨ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮਿਲਦਾ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਰੇਟਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਦੇਵੋ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਆ ਅਗਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਸੋਚ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੰਦਰਜੀਤ ਕਾਲੀਰਾਏ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਦੇਵੋ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ